Out on the Arizona frontier, there were nights when the wind blew as if it meant to carry every human sound straight into the desert. On one of those nights, Jed Monroe, a young rancher living alone with his scrawny herd of cattle, was sitting by his fire when he heard a knock at the door. It was not the wind, not a branch torn loose. It was a slow, heavy knock, the kind made by a hand not used to knocking gently. When he opened the door, the whole doorway seemed to go dark under the shape standing on his porch. It was a giant Apache woman, towering over him, shoulders broad, long hair falling like a strip of mountain shadow down her back. She was not there to ask for food, not to beg a place to sleep. She spoke only one line: "Your horse is bleeding in the ravine. I held it for you." From that sentence on, two worlds that had spent years avoiding each other began to slip into the same orbit. Slowly, in a way no one could stop. Jed Monroe was used to quiet. He lived alone on a dry patch of land where the desert had started swallowing the edge of the pine woods, more used to wind than to human voices. Every day was the same. He rose before dawn, watered his cattle, fixed whatever section of fence had given out, then sat on his porch and watched the sun climb over the distant rock ridge. It was a simple life, repetitive, and sometimes so lonely that even the clink of a cup on the table sounded like a sigh. That night, he was sipping black coffee when the knock came. Jed got up, not in a hurry, but with his heart beating just a little faster. Folks did not come out to the border at that hour unless something was wrong. He opened the door before he had time to say a word. For a moment, his eyes had to adjust to the dark. Then the shape on the porch came into focus. An Apache woman, so tall the low roof of his porch almost did not clear her. Firelight from inside brushed across her face, picking out deep black eyes and a tiredness he did not know how to name. She spoke first. "Your horse, the light brown one. Its leg was cut on the rock." Jed froze. "Blaze? He looked fine to me." The woman nodded slightly. "This afternoon he went down toward the dry stream bed. No one saw. I heard him cry." There was a brief pause, as if even the wind were waiting for his answer. Jed pulled the door wider. "Come in. I will get the lantern." She did not step across the threshold, only stood there in the dim light. "I will wait outside." Jed did not press her. He grabbed his storm lantern and his coat. When he turned back, he realized she had not moved at all, as if she were part of the darkness itself. "What is your name?" he asked. She answered after the length of one slow breath. "Sahoya." Jed gave a small nod. "I am Jed." They walked out into the night together. The lantern swung in his hand, its light sliding across tall cactus trunks and tufts of dry grass shivering in the wind. Sahoya walked ahead, her stride long and sure, never bothering to look down, like someone born from the shadows of the desert. Jed kept his voice low, not wanting to break the fragile stillness. "Why did you help my horse?" Sahoya's gaze stayed on the darkness in front of them. It was afraid. When something is afraid, I do not walk away. Jed did not answer right away. He had never heard anyone talk about fear like that, and he had never seen anyone kneel beside his injured horse except himself. When they reached the ravine, Blaze's breathing came to them through the dark, weak but still steady. In the lantern light, Jed saw the deep gash along the horse's leg, already wrapped in clean fabric, the bandage tied off with a neat, solid knot. "You did this?" he asked. Sahoya dipped her head. "I used an old shirt. Would not let it bleed more." Jed crouched beside Blaze. His fingers brushed the bandage, then he looked up at her. "You saved him." Sahoya said, "I was just passing by. I do not let animals die afraid." Blaze heard his master's voice, gave a soft whinny and began to calm. Jed stroked the horse's neck, his eyes softening in a way they had not softened for anyone in all the years he had lived alone. "Thank you, Sahoya," he said quietly. She did not answer. She only stood there, tall and silent, like a mountain shadow that had stepped out of the past. On the way back to the ranch, the night wind moved around them. Jed noticed something strange. The desert did not feel so empty this time. For the first time, he was not walking alone under that wide, starless sky. Beside him was someone from a world he had only ever heard of through the wind and through stories that never had anything good to say in town. Yet now, here he was, walking the same path with her. Jed did not say any of that out loud, but he felt it clearly. Something had changed tonight. In him, and maybe in her as well. As for the rest of the world, they did not yet know that the simple presence of Sahoya had already begun to shift the invisible line between two ways of living. And once that line began to move, it would never slide back to where it had been before. The next morning, the Arizona sun climbed up slow but burned hot right away. On the hard ground and among the jagged cactus around the ranch, there were no tracks left from Sahoya. Jed stepped out onto the porch, hand raised to shade his eyes as he tried to see farther. The sky was a clean, washed blue after the windy night. He figured she had left early, as if the whole night before had just been a stray shadow passing through his world. Jed led Blaze out of the stall and checked the bandage again. The strip of cloth she had wrapped the night before was still tight, not loose, not overdone. He changed it for a fresh one, but kept the old strip aside. Something in him would not let him throw it away. It held a little warmth, a little kindness, and something else he did not yet have a name for. That afternoon, Jed saddled Blaze and rode along the dry stream bed. He told himself he wanted to see where the horse had been hurt, to understand why it had wandered down there. But deep down, he knew he was looking for something else. Any sign of her? The giant Apache woman. The creek was down to a few shallow pools. Along the bank, a large footprint had sunk deep in the soft sand. It was deeper than his own boot prints. When he set his foot beside it, the difference made him smile without thinking. "She is big," he murmured to himself. A faint crack of a branch came from across the bank. Jed turned. Sahoya stood there, a small leather bag in her hand. She looked at him without surprise, as if she had already known he would come. He lifted a hand in greeting. "I thought you had gone on your way." Sahoya stepped over a rock, her shadow stretching long across the sand. "Wherever I go, I come back here. I live in these mountains. This dry stream is the path I walk every day." Jed nodded. "I did not know if any Apache still lived close by." Sahoya answered slowly, choosing her words. "Not many. Most have left. I stayed because I will not give this place up." A thin, fragile silence drifted between them. Jed watched her, not with the cautious look he had seen in other people, but the way you look at another person, plain and simple, even if that person is unlike anyone you have met before. He asked, "You wrapped Blaze's leg real well. Who taught you how to do that?" Sahoya glanced down at her hands. My mother. She said a wound must be touched by hands that are not afraid." Jed said, "You did just that." For a moment something softened in Sahoya's eyes, as if that kind of praise was unfamiliar. "Few people talk to me like that," she said quietly. Jed stood a few steps away from her, but that distance already felt shorter than it had the first night they met. Maybe they have not taken the time to really look. A light wind swept across them, dust rose and glittered in the late sunlight. Jed stroked Blaze's neck and said, "If you had not helped him yesterday, I would have lost the best horse I have." Sahoya stayed silent. Jed went on, "If you ever need anything, even just some water or scraps of cloth, I am right over there." Sahoya looked at him. In those deep black eyes was something heavier than a simple thank you. "I know you are not saying that to get something in return." Jed answered, "That is right." For a brief moment, their eyes met in the harsh desert light. There was something there, not sudden love, not loud sparks of feeling, only recognition. Two worlds that were never meant to touch, quietly realizing the other existed. Sahoya bent down to pick up a broken branch. Her fingers brushed the ground like they were touching something familiar. "Ranchers and Apache do not usually stand in the same place like this," she said. Jed's voice was gentle. "Maybe only because they have never tried." She did not smile, but her eyes softened. She nodded once. "I should go. The trail up the mountain is long, and it will be dark soon." Jed answered in a tone that was almost a wish. "Will you be walking past the creek again tomorrow?" Sahoya replied simply, "I walk this way every day." When she turned to go, her shadow stretched across the ground like a moving hillside. Jed watched until that shadow blended into rock and sunlight and could no longer be told apart from either. Blaze tossed his head lightly, as if reminding him it was time to head home. Jed did not hurry. He looked at the dry creek, at the sand, at the place where she had just been standing. For the first time in many years, he felt that this land was not just a place where he worked and slept between long days. It was beginning to feel like a place with another kind of life, a place where there was someone he wanted to see again. And he knew one thing very clearly. From that night to this afternoon, his world was no longer as separate as it had been before. In the days that followed, Jed started paying attention to when the sun fell across the dry creek. He never said a word about it, but every afternoon, after he finished feeding the cattle, he always found a reason to ride Blaze out that way. Not to check the fence, not to look for wolf tracks. He just wanted to see if Sahoya would pass by, the way she'd said, and every day she did. She didn't always stop. Sometimes it was only her tall silhouette, moving past the cactus and red rock, a dark shape gliding through the heat shimmer. But that alone was enough to warm something in Jed's chest, a quiet proof that he was no longer just a stray rock in the middle of the desert. One afternoon, the heat eased a little. Clouds softened the sun, and wind came down off the rock ridge with a sound like the land itself, letting out a long breath. Jed had just tied Blaze to a mesquite tree when he saw Sahoya standing a few steps away. She set a small leather bag on the ground. Inside were cactus pears, peeled and cleaned. Jed tilted his head. "You brought those for me?" Sahoya nodded. "You said yesterday you only had coffee and hard bread. A man who lives alone gets used to eating poorly." Jed let out a low chuckle. "I'm used to it." Sahoya said, "No one should get used to doing everything alone." The words made Jed go still for a moment. He looked at her, wanting to ask 100 questions, but only managing one simple line. "Thank you." Sahoya sat down on a big rock near the dry creek. Jed sat a short distance away. It was closer than the first time they'd met, but still far enough that she wouldn't feel crowded. He'd learned that quickly, without anyone having to teach him. After a while, he asked, "Where do you live up there?" "In an old shelter," Sahoya replied. "It used to belong to my family." Jed went quiet. So now it's just you. Yes. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a sad story. Just a fact, spoken in that level, calm tone that sounded like the mountains she lived in. Jed nodded slightly. Same as me then. Sahoya glanced at him. Why do you live alone? Jed exhaled slowly. Not for any grand reason. I just never found a reason to come back to anyone. And now? Jed answered carefully, like he was picking his way through unfamiliar ground. Lately, I've started to find a reason not to hide from the world so much. Sahoya didn't press him, but her gaze dipped for a moment, as if she were afraid to look straight at whatever was growing between them. High above, a crow spread its wings. The wind seemed to pause right then, even the sand under their boots falling quiet. It was in that stillness that Jed realized he wanted to ask something important. Sahoya, he said, people in town say bad things about Apache. You know that, and you still helped me. She answered softly, with neither anger nor hurt in her voice. People speak about what they don't understand. They see I'm taller, stronger, different, and they're afraid. But you are not afraid. Jed replied at once. I'm not afraid of the one who saved my horse. I'm not afraid of the one who walks by this creek every day and never harms anyone. And I'm not afraid of a heart that knows how to tend a wound with gentle hands. Sahoya turned her face away. Her broad shoulders dropped just a little, like something inside her was finally loosening, growing softer, less ready for a fight. Maybe it was the first time in many years she'd heard a white man speak to her in a voice that held no caution at all. After a while, she asked, If someday I'm in danger from your people, what will you do? Jed answered without hesitation, steady but not loud. I'll stand in between. Not because you're Apache, because you're someone I want to keep in my life. The wind picked up again. A dry branch fell and tapped lightly against the ground. Jed didn't add anything more. Neither did Sahoya, but the space between them had changed. Whatever lay there was no longer just distance. It had begun to feel like a small bridge stretched across a deep ravine no one had ever dared cross before. When the sun started to drop toward the horizon, Sahoya rose to her feet. I have to go. I need to reach the mountain before dark. Jed stood too. I'll see you tomorrow. Sahoya looked at him, her eyes much softer than they had been that first night. If you come to the dry creek, I will see you. Then she walked away, her shadow sliding over the red earth like a moving hillside climbing toward the rocks. Jed stood there watching, one hand resting on Blaze's neck as if he needed the touch to steady himself. He could feel that something was changing out here in the desert. Not the land, not the wind. Him. And the distance between a rancher and a giant Apache woman, a distance that had once seemed impossible to cross, was quietly shrinking, day by day, so gently that no one else would have noticed. The days Jed met Sahoya at the dry creek turned into a habit he had no desire to break. But that new habit did not belong only to him. People in town started noticing how often he rode toward the stone ridge every afternoon. In a place where 10 people lived like 10 listening ears, even the smallest change was enough to become a story that spread through the saloon by nightfall. One morning, Jed stopped by the general store to buy salt and some leather straps to fix his saddle. The shopkeeper, usually gentle and quiet, watched him a little longer than usual. Heard you've been riding out toward the dry creek a lot lately, he said. Jed answered simply, That's right. I've been checking that area. The shopkeeper closed his mouth, then opened it again, slower this time. Folks say you've been meeting an Apache out there. Jed didn't want to lie. He didn't really know how to hide much of anything. He just let out a slow breath. Yes. She helped me save my horse. The shopkeeper set the sack of salt on the counter. His face didn't harden with the kind of hatred Jed had seen in others, but there was an awkwardness there. It's just, people don't understand. You'd best be careful. Jed nodded and didn't add anything. He understood, but understanding didn't mean he was going to step back. He knew what he'd seen in Sahoya, and it didn't look anything like the stories they told in town. When he walked out, a few men standing outside the saloon watched him go. It wasn't idle curiosity in their eyes. It was the look of people who believe their world should never touch another. That afternoon, Jed reached the creek later than usual. Sunlight slid through the old pines in long, bright stripes. Sahoya was already there, a leather water gourd in her hand. When she saw him, she set it down on a rock. He spoke first. "The town started talking about you." Sahoya didn't look at him right away. She swept her long hair back from her face and answered in a very calm voice. "They've been talking about me since before you were born. That's nothing new." Jed shook his head slightly. "This time they're talking because I'm standing next to you." Sahoya was quiet for a few breaths worth of wind. Then she asked, "Do you want to stand farther away from me?" Jed looked straight at her. "No." That simple answer made her turn her head aside. Not to hide annoyance, but to hide the softness that was starting to spread through her eyes. He could feel it, even if she didn't show much. After a while, she said, "Your town is afraid of people like me. I'm used to that, but you don't have to walk yourself into trouble." Jed shook his head. "Sahoya, you helped my horse. You didn't take anything. You didn't ask for anything. No one has the right to tell me I should turn my back on someone who's kind." The wind pushed through the sand, carrying the smell of sun and hot stone. Their voices weren't loud, but what passed between them carried the weight of two lives that had stood apart for far too long. Sahoya sat down on the big rock by the creek. "With Jed, your world lives by the laws of the town. My world lives by the laws of the mountain. Those two don't often fit together." Jed stepped closer and sat down beside her. "You're forgetting something." "What?" "My world isn't just the town. There are empty spaces in it, and I get to choose who I let into those spaces." Sahoya looked at him, her dark eyes reflecting the gold of the late afternoon. "You're not afraid of people looking in?" Jed smiled a little, just at the corner of his mouth. "And I've lived alone long enough to know this. What other people see matters less than what I see myself." That moment was like a mountain cracking somewhere deep inside the rock. Not loud, not violent, but certain. Something new was opening. When they stood to leave, the sound of hoofbeats drifted toward them from a distance. It wasn't Blaze. This was 3 horses, running fast, half hidden in the dust. Sahoya turned her head first. Jed straightened his back. 3 men from town rode into view. Their faces weren't angry, but they weren't friendly either. The one in front called out, "Jed, we've got something to ask you." Jed glanced at Sahoya, then back at them. "Go ahead." The man looked at her, then spoke. "You're getting yourself mixed up in something that doesn't belong to you." Sahoya stood still, her shoulders high and solid like a wall of stone. Jed stepped forward half a pace, blocking part of her with his own body. "If this involves her, then it does belong to me." The 3 men looked at each other. Sunlight cut down across their faces, turning them into hard, shifting shadows. Then one of them said, "Good, then you'd better listen close." None of them knew it, but that was the exact moment when the two worlds really slammed into each other, and nothing would stay the same after that collision. Wind from the desert swept across the dry creek, lifting red sand into the late afternoon light. Jed stood facing the three mounted men, while Sahoya stood behind him, though she was not hiding behind him. She stood tall, broad shoulders catching the last of the sunlight like a silent wall. The man in front spoke. "Jed, let me ask you straight. How long do you plan on staying tangled up with her? You're disturbing the town's peace." Jed's voice stayed calm. "The town was peaceful enough when I lived alone, but my world isn't the same anymore." The man's face tightened. "She's Apache. You know what that brings with it." Jed answered without hesitation. "All I know is she saved my horse, and I know she's never harmed a single soul in that town." Another man cut in. "People like her only bring trouble." This time, Sahoya stepped forward, her voice low and clear. "I am not trouble. I'm just someone living on my own land, where my people walked long before any of you came." The words froze all four men where they stood, not because they were afraid, but because it was a truth none of them had ever heard spoken aloud by an Apache. Jed drew a deep breath. "If you came out here to tell me to stay away from her, my answer is no." One of the men jerked his reins. "Jed, you're cutting yourself off from the town." Jed spoke softly, but his words weighed more than any shout. "I cut loose from the town a long time ago. I only belong to the things that make me a better man, and she is one of those things." A strong gust swept past, curling the sand into small, rolling waves. No one spoke for a few long seconds. Then the lead rider exhaled slowly. He no longer looked at Sahoya. He looked at Jed, like a man trying to make sense of something new. "You've changed, Jed. Not in a bad way, but you've changed." Jed said, "I know." The man nodded once. "Then you take responsibility for this choice." Jed answered, "I always do." The three men glanced at one another. None of them wanted to drag this any further out into a desert full of sharp rocks and hot wind. They turned their horses. Before they left, the oldest of them looked back. "Just remember one thing. Not everyone in town thinks like we do." Jed called after him. "What do you mean?" The man's voice came back roughened by sun and dust. "Some folks aren't afraid of what's different. Some just need time." They rode off, hoofbeats fading over the dry ground. When the dust settled, only Jed and Sahoya remained, standing side by side like two figures pressed against a new kind of reality. Jed turned to her. "You all right?" Sahoya met his gaze, her dark eyes deeper in the oncoming dusk. "I've faced worse things, but having someone stand in front of me, that's something I'm not used to." Jed gave a small, crooked smile. "I'm not standing in front of you. I'm standing with you." Sahoya glanced down at the ground for a heartbeat, then said, "You're not afraid I'll make your life harder?" Jed answered at once. "Sahoya, my life was already hard, but since I met you, at least it has a direction." A soft breeze moved through the ravine. No more sand swirling in hard gusts, just a gentle breath, as if the desert itself had calmed. Sahoya said quietly, "I've lived alone for a long time. I never thought anyone could step into where I live without breaking it." Jed moved a little closer. "I didn't come to break it. I came to share the quiet you've been holding alone for too long." It wasn't a confession of love, It was simply the truth of a man who knew the empty space in his heart now had someone standing in it. Sahoya looked into his eyes. The last light of the day shimmered in hers like sunlight on shallow water. If you step into my world, you won't be the same as before. Jed smiled slowly. I don't want to be the same as before. There was no sudden kiss, no hurried embrace, just a deep understanding, soft as wind and clear as the last light of day. As they led Blaze back toward the ranch, their shadows stretched long over the red earth. Two shapes, but they looked almost like one. And from that day on, the Arizona desert was no longer split in two. It became a land where two lives that had once stood far apart found a way to move together. Not loudly, not grandly, just healing little by little. That year, Arizona was as hot as 1,000 summers before it. The wind still carried sand past the cactus ridges, and the sun still burned down on the hard stone paths where Sahoya's ancestors once walked. But they say that ever since the summer Jed Monroe brought that giant Apache woman home to his ranch, the land changed a little. Not much, just enough for those who paid attention to notice. The stares from town weren't as sharp as they used to be. A few people nodded to Jed more often. A few watched Sahoya with less suspicion in their eyes. And sometimes, in the late afternoon, folks would see two figures walking along the dry creek. One tall, one shorter, but their steps falling in the same rhythm. They never told anyone they were in love. They didn't need to. The desert had seen it. The wind had heard. Some stories don't need a loud ending. It's enough that two people found peace in a place where once there was only loneliness. Jed and Sahoya did just that, in the quiet, beautiful hush of an old, weathered frontier. If their journey made you pause for a moment and breathe a little slower, please subscribe to Tales from the Wild West. Don't forget to like, comment, and ring the bell. So on more of your quiet nights, you'll have a gentle story waiting to keep you company.